Everyone, thank you so much for joining us for our June webinar. We're really excited. I know last month we talked about hurricanes and flooding, and this month we have a very special guest from the National Weather Service who is going to give us a little bit more information about hurricanes. So that's going to be a great presentation. I just wanted to start out with a couple things. We do still have our theme for 2025, which is Together We're Ready, and we're really focusing on family preparedness. We're going to have several events coming up this fall around this theme, so we're really excited. So next month, we'll be able to give you some more information on those events. Ready Fairfax is our county's preparedness program. We do offer quite a few different classes. Whether you want to do them in person, you can always request us to come out, or you can find some of them online where you can do them independently at home. We do have the Community Emergency Response Guide, which of course has templates. It has checklists so you can make your emergency kit. But it also has hazard pages such as the hurricane and tropical storm one that you see here, which gives information on what to do before, during, and after. But I'm not going to steal our guest thunder. So I would love to introduce to you Jeremy from the National Weather Service right here in our area. So Jeremy, I'll kick it off to you.
Thanks, Courtney. Thanks for having me. I'm happy here to talk about the hurricane season, both what we're predicting or general idea what we're predicting, the risk from hurricanes, the hazards, and different kind of products we offer. So about 2 weeks ago, we had NOAA actually release their annual prediction or outlook, which say of how many hurricanes are roughly expected. Now, this is just an outlook. It's not saying we're going to actually have this many, but the general gist of this is we're expecting above normal season for tropical systems, hurricanes, and also potentially major hurricanes. And it generally breaks down that there's basically a tropical season, including tropical storms, hurricanes, and major hurricanes. And here's a breakdown of all the names for this year. If we get through all these, there is a secondary set of names. They've actually moved away a couple years ago from using those like Zeta names and actually had a secondary set of names, all the way from Andrea to Wendy. And again, we want to highlight the peak of the season. Typically, it starts June 1st. Of course, we can have storms before June 1st, same as we can have storms after the season ends, which is the ending is November 30th. But the peak of season typically falls late August into mid-October. That's when basically, temperatures, we're starting to have that transition. And just going to focus some of the areas where tropical systems June, it's very rare to have an early season, but they are focused along in the Caribbean. As we move more into the summer, we start to have these waves that come off of Africa and then move into the Caribbean. But our big threat window is September into October. That's when you have those more of a path going into the Caribbean and then also into the eastern seaboard. But again, we can have a tropical event any time of season, but just the peak is that late August into October period. So let's take a look at some of the hazards associated with tropical cyclones. Some others are maybe familiar. Some of these might be a surprise that there might be a bigger hazard than people think. The 5 main ones is all the areas affected are going to be, we're not going to have rip currents really in Fairfax, but wind will be a big issue, tornadoes, even storm surge is a potential. If you get some nice winds being pushed up the Potomac, you can actually have a storm surge threat. And of course, one of the biggest threats in our area outside of wind and tornadoes is probably inland flooding. I think inland flooding is the biggest threat in the mid-Atlantic, especially outside of the coast from a tropical event. Some of the biggest flooding in our area, the records are related to leftover tropical systems or actually low-end weak hurricanes. So just to break down, the main fatalities related to tropical, as you can see, freshwater flooding, flooding of rivers and streams and creeks is the biggest threat over a 10-year period from 2013 to 2022. Overwhelmingly freshwater flooding. Second is basically a tie between wind and storm surge. Maybe in this area might be more wind just because that's more impact versus storm surge. Storm surge might be more if you have the right direction. And then, of course, surf and rip is a big threat, but that's more of a oceanside area versus us. And then tornadoes and lightning are a lesser extent on top of marine and like unknown, maybe secondary threats here. So let's break down each of the hazards. Freshwater flooding, which is my specialty here at the National Weather Service. This can affect a large area. So basically, you go from just not the county of Fairfax being incorporated, but maybe the whole DMV and even further out into West Virginia, Maryland, and parts. So it's more of a regional threat a lot of times than just a localized threat. So you can have impacts felt region wide, so that also affects the ability for people to respond and also take cover. So always be aware of your flooding threat. Are you near a stream, creek, river? The places you drive, are they within areas that typically flood? That's something good to know. And of course, Agnes, the 50-year anniversary is coming up, and that was one of the biggest, I think, flood events in this area. I grew up in Pennsylvania, and Agnes is basically the stories that all my relatives used to talk about. It was a big event for the Mid-Atlantic. Another example, storm surge is an issue. Isabel is a good example. It wasn't a direct hit on the area, but it was just the right path of the storm where you had winds being pushed up the bay in the Potomac. And this is actually a lot of the coastal records for flooding are due to this event that happened back in 2003 due to Hurricane Isabel that happened actually in mid to late September. I believe this is Annapolis for your reference. And of course, if you're along the coast going out to the beach, Ocean City, even parts of the Chesapeake Bay, rip currents can be a concern. And one thing to be aware of, even a tropical system being well off coast, 100, 200 miles away, they can actually cause strong rip currents along the coast. So that's something to be aware of. Just because the hurricane's not affecting the coast directly, winds pushing the water toward the coast can actually cause a rip current issue much further out. Wind damage, again, Isabel is one of those events that happen, widespread trees and power lines. Ivan is another one. I've heard some of the Ivan hurricane that came through here, they had like 25 different tornadoes that came in through here. So even though storms are degrading or weakening, wind damage is a big issue, especially if you get a lot of rain. Rain makes it easier for trees to fall down. And that on top of the tornado threat, again, like I mentioned, Ivan was a very prolific tornado event. We had over 53 tornadoes reported in this area. And that all happened in basically a 1 to 2 day period. So just imagine that many tornadoes happening in the region. And it looks like including one strong one out in western Fairfax. So it's not just weak tornadoes, it's also fairly strong tornadoes that can be associated with tropical events. So forecasting for hurricanes is a big team effort. The tracks, the intensity, the size, as well as the outlooks and initial warnings and stuff are put out by the National Center, the National Hurricane Center out of Miami, Florida. They do all the forecasting for the tropics from the Atlantic down into the Caribbean and the lower parts of the Atlantic Ocean. They send out the watches and warnings, and then we take that, reissue them, and localize and try and fine-tune those forecasts and those threats for the public. So you're not looking at the whole United States. You're looking at what's the impacts for our area and not for, say, North Carolina. And so we take that big picture and localize it for everyone in Fairfax. And again, we have teams of experts. We have the hurricane experts who are, tracking these storms throughout the area, but we're the local experts on the impacts. They know there's going to be heavy rain, winds, tornadoes, but they're not experts on how that impacts our area. So we know flooding is a big concern in this area. We know tornadoes and storm surge, coastal flooding is a big issue. Tree damage is a big issue throughout Fairfax, the combination of urban and more of a suburb rural area. So we take that local knowledge and fine tune this forecast and work with the National Hurricane Center to give you the best forecast and story about what's going to happen. And of course, there's multiple different pages you look at. One of them is our localized tropical page on our website. That is weather.gov/Washington/tropical. And we have a lot of good information here. What's the current outlook? What's the current threats, impacts, radar, satellite. So we kind of bring everything into a smaller website, and it's all localized to us. So you don't have to go clicking around the National Hurricane Center. This is all on our website. And some things to know, last year we did have a pretty big, impactful hurricane come up through our area. It didn't directly hit our area. We didn't have a direct hit, but there was enough of an indirect impact from Helene that we had quite a bit of flooding, especially down in parts of central and even parts of northern Virginia, especially along the Blue Ridge Mountains. It tracked up through the western panhandle of Florida, up through Georgia, and then tracked just west of North Carolina, South Carolina. But that put the North Carolina and South Carolina in an optimal area for a lot of heavy rain, enhancements along mountains. And so, as you can saw down in Asheville, they had prolific flooding down there. It was just perfect. Up in our area, we had areas that got 2 to 4 with locally higher amounts, 6 inches along the ridges. So we actually had quite a bit of flooding, especially out in the Shenandoah, as well as widespread minor flooding throughout the DMV, specifically also Fairfax. It was a pretty historical storm, a Cat 4 making landfall along the Carolinas is pretty impactful. And this is the second one of the year. We had Debbie early on in August, and the flooding was pretty impactful. I mean, some of the most direct fatalities come from, like I said, fresh water. Agnes is 95. We think Helene might have caused the most wind-related direct fatalities since any storm since 1963. So it was a very impactful, especially further south. So just be aware of that. There's a lot of impacts from flooding, winds, and storm surge. And here's kind of a breakdown. You can see those higher amounts along the mountains up in our area. But you can see also see those big amounts out in western North Carolina. If this would have shifted a little bit further north, we could have seen those higher amounts of anywhere between 7 to 10 inches up in our area, even further up. But even that, we had 2 to 3 inches up into the Fairfax, Loudoun areas. So it was pretty impactful, especially after a fairly a secondary system back in August. And of course, you can see even after the Helene made landfall, we had quite a big inland wind threat. So that even though it weakened as it moved into Georgia, into the Carolinas, those winds actually stayed pretty strong. They had 70-mile-per-hour gusts all the way up through western Virginia and into western North Carolina. So that's pretty impressive. Typically, a tropical system starts to weaken as soon as it makes landfall, but this one had enough punch to it that as it got up further inland, had even just as strong winds above 70, maybe even 80-knot winds with a lot of damage and flooding. And of course, with us moving into hurricane season, there's a lot of products out there. One of the main one is the Hurricane Threat Impact. So basically a color code threat to show the different levels for each of the hazards. Winds, maybe the yellow threat's lower, 39 to 57 miles per hour, but the higher impacts, those pings, that's 110 miles per hour or higher. That's like an F3 tornado affecting a large area. We do the same thing for storm surge. Again, it's focused along the coast. Flooding rain tends to be a bigger area. We have that red threat for major flooding is likely or possible. And of course, we'll highlight the threat for tornadoes. In this case, there was a potential for an orange threat for potential. So those color codes really catches your eyes to allow you to see where the threat's going to be. That's all I have for you all. Again, stay tuned to your local weather service office as well as your local county officials for any information, especially as we move into tropical season. It starts, it's actually already started. It's June 4th, so we're well into it.
Thank you, Jeremy. We really appreciate it. And I would say one of the things that, we always encourage our residents as they're traveling throughout the summer to make sure that they are aware of the weather, but also you can sign up for weather alerts wherever you're going. So just like on the screen, you see Fairfax alerts, you can also sign up for alerts in whatever town or city that you're going to visit for the summer. So always just keep that in mind. And then, of course, you can follow us on social media, but I would also say follow the National Weather Service on social media. They do a great job giving a lot of that information that you're going to get on the news. You can see all of the up-to-date graphics on there, and we do often share those on our social media too. So you can find us on X, Facebook, or Instagram. And then we will see you next month. So we will have our next webinar on July 2nd, and we will give you some more information on some events that are going to be happening in the fall. And we'll talk to you then. Thank you.